I would like to kick off this parliamentary session by urging all MPs to support the Fall Economic Statement Implementation Act.
In this session of Parliament, we will fight to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
Poilievre has not presented one damn economic policy since he's been there.
Why does this government wait until things are at a breaking point before acting?
Okay, it's been a busy first week back in the House of Commons as the Liberals came out looking to set the agenda early and moved on promised legislation, while the Conservatives continued to challenge the Liberals on affordability and the carbon tax. But later in the week, a controversial policy from Alberta Premier Daniel Smith really quickened the political pulse right across the country.
These policies include a prohibition on gender reassignment surgeries for minors aged 17 and under. For children aged 15 and under, puberty blockers and hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment will also not be permitted.
All right, time to bring in our three party insiders on this. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. And Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. All right, gang, good to see you. Happy Friday. Mel, look, that Daniel Smith leads right, that clip of Daniel Smith leads right into your pick as sort of like a big issue this week. Why don't you get us started there?
Yeah, for sure. For starters, just quickly to touch on that policy or on what she was announcing, picking a fight with kids, with trans kids, with vulnerable kids, policies that will be harmful, that medical experts, that mental health experts say are harmful across the board, but still going ahead with this. But to how we talk about this in Ottawa, or how it relates to what's happening in Ottawa, this is now the second week that we're having a conversation about something that Daniel Smith does that the Conservatives in Ottawa are going to have to answer for. Last week we were talking about Tucker Carlson and his homophobic comments last week. This week we're talking about this policies that are harmful to trans kids. Obviously the Conservatives don't want to talk about it, but they're going to have to. Now, I was at a dinner last night, and Jagmeet Singh and both Rachel Notley were there, and they both spoke about kind of this moment that we're in and how across the country we're seeing some Conservative leaders divide people, pick fights with people. We're seeing, in Alberta, the healthcare crisis is huge. The electricity, people had to, in the coldest day of the year, had to, not turn the heat on because they thought that they were going to run out of power. Like, those things are things that our governments should be tackling, or things that people should be addressing. That's what people are asking for us to do. The real problems in people's lives, and in a moment where those things are happening, to see policies of division that target kids is disappointing. But to hear, I'm going to flip it as a positive, to hear both Jagmeet and Rachel yesterday talk about how in moments like that, how do we come together and tell people, Canada's not broken, here's how we come together and make it better, was at least a good moment to flip that around.
Fred, to Mel's point that the Conservatives will have to speak to this. So far, they have not, and we saw reporting in the Globe from Marika Walsh that they've sent out an email saying, do not speak about this. And if you're buttonholed, here's a few points. What do you make of this move? Why the push for silence on something like this?
To Mel's point earlier, it's about focusing on the issues that actually matter and that are really in the front and center of Canadians. And right now it's affordability, it's a high price of groceries and other things, and fighting on those issues. And that's what Mr. Poilievre and his team has been very disciplined in focusing on that. This is a party that knows what it's doing in that regard, and they're not going to weigh into these issues.
But even if it's a question of minority rights, universal access to health care, these sorts of things. I mean, I know they want to talk about axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime. I mean, it's a very simple, easy to understand and grasp, effective slogan. But, the world has a way of intruding,
It certainly does, and it shows their discipline of sticking to their message. You showed a clip off the top here. We had all the leaders say different comments. Next week, the NDP and the Bloc and the Liberals will say different things. Poilievre's going to say the same thing he said this week. He's going to say it the week after that and the week after that. And that's how he's building the base and the support he has right now to be where he is in the polls.
Greg, how do you view it?
Except that Pierre Poilievre has talked about this just when he thought that nobody was going to be around to record him. There was something that Press Progress had some weeks back where he talks about, I forget the phrase.
Radical gender ideology. Justin Trudeau won't oppose his radical gender ideology
So
agenda.
he will talk about it. It's just who's listening and who's the audience and who's allowed to hear it. I'm with Mel on this. I picked last week the underreporting of Tucker Carlson's comments, homophobic, transphobic. That was the shot. This is the chaser. And I think it's, she may have tried to package it, and people got, I think, initially fooled by the packaging of it. But Dawn Braid in the Calgary Herald has written about this and how she's speaking to a part of the base of her party that she just won an election. She shouldn't need to have to speak to, and she didn't talk about this during the election. I too am, from a political perspective, the political analysis on this, set aside what families have to deal with, is I'm questioning, there are 61% of doctors in a survey this week that said they're considering leaving the Alberta health system. The Alberta pension plan, whatever happened to that? It polled badly with her own party. So I think we're seeing a bit of distraction. There are 3 provinces that are going after this: Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick. Pay attention to those provinces. In New Brunswick, there are, I think, 3 cabinet ministers now that have announced they're not running again. People in New Brunswick are questioning why their premier is out west fundraising on this stuff. Saskatchewan, you look, the governing Saskatchewan party, which is a Conservative party, are polling very badly in the cities. It's tough to get provincial polling. They don't do a lot of it. But I am not so sure, and he's been there for a long time, I'm not so sure that in New Brunswick and Saskatchewan, this is working out all that well for them, because it's not distracting the people from healthcare or how their lives are going right now.
So Fred, here's my question on the rigid message discipline, and it has worked for them. But I remember Melissa Lantsman writing opinion pieces in the Globe and Mail. Eric Duncan has spoken out, on LGBTQ issues. Michelle Rempel has as well. She has it on her
Bill
personal
C-16.
webpage. Where, can you keep them not talking about this, not taking a position on this, given that past track record and the positions they've taken in the past?
It really depends on how the media cycles work and if this continues. This is Friday night we're talking about this. Are we going to be talking about this Monday? Are they going to be hit with this? Are they going to go back to their main issue? It's whether the other parties are going to keep hammering on it. If the Liberals and the NDP think this is something they need to do in the media, they need to hammer them on it. If they don't do that, if they drop it and go into chase down another hole, then this won't be something the Conservatives keep talking about.
Mel,
for sure.
what do you think just on that?
I think he's going to have to answer for it, whether it's now and maybe he sticks to his message because he doesn't want to talk about it, but we are heading into an election and these things will come back up. So he's going to have to either address it today or let that doubt fester in people's minds that this is somebody who agrees with all these things, and then have to address it come whenever that election is.
Well, and to Greg's point, New Brunswick and Saskatchewan will probably have elections on where this will be front
and
center.
it's coming in the courts, so every time it comes in the courts, this is going to be in the news.
Okay, Greg, you have picked something that the Prime Minister suggested today, Pierre Poilievre, also has to answer for. What have you got for your topic today?
So if you, poor question period, everyone maligns it. John Turner, former Prime Minister, called it a name that I can't use on the show. I'll say baloney theatre, although Liberals, we swear.
Baloney, yeah.
We swear, and that makes the news too. But
That's a deep cut. Anyway, keep going.
But yesterday, I think in question period, Sean Fraser was standing in for Champagne, and he responded with the fact that Jenny Byrne's company is registered provincially in Ontario for Loblaws. And this is a week where there were Conservative MPs tweeting about how a deal around Manulife and Loblaws around provincial pharmaceuticals was something that the federal government could address. And I think this was starting to irritate Liberals. A couple of weeks ago, I saw a screen capture that Jenny Byrne and Associates were registered at Queen's Park.
Yep.
I thought it'd be a story, but then it wasn't, so I thought, well, maybe it's not true. This has been percolating for a while. And I think this isn't as much about Jenny Byrne and Associates as it is about the Liberals wondering why this story hasn't been covered. And so it was brought up yesterday. Mark Gerritsen got a lot of traction with it on Twitter. And then the Prime Minister brings it up today, and then there's coverage. And so I think the question is, it was a little bit of an experiment by the Liberals to see, how do you make news in this new atmosphere?
Well, I take your point. Full disclosure, though, we were working on this. The CBC, the newsroom was working on it. There was a story being prepared when the Prime Minister got out ahead of it. And, anyway, that's how these things happen. But, Fred, what do you make of this point? I mean, we saw Ryan Williams, who is the Member of Parliament for Bay of Quinte, Shadow Minister for Pan-Canadian Trade and Competition. He put out a video criticizing the Manulife deal. with Loblaws and Shoppers Drug Mart and blaming the Liberals and the NDP for it. And then the Liberals respond with, by the way, the person who's pulling all the strings in your political operations, her company, not her. The Prime Minister was inaccurate today when he said it was Jenny Byrne herself, but it's her company, which bears her name, is one of their main lobbyists in Ontario.
Right. She's not registered to lobby for them.
She is not.
It is her company. Well, look, I'm going to kind of echo what Greg said here about how this company was actually registered to lobby for Loblaws 6 months ago. Loblaws was really in the news. I came on your show to talk one night about when Galen Weston was in Ottawa talking about this. And the Liberals didn't seem to even know. They never checked the registry. This is a failure of the Liberals to throw these punches if they're trying to get these stories out there.
Nice try.
This is a big.
I think the Conservatives have known for a while that this was
for sure
circulating about Jenny Byrne. What I don't understand, especially after it came up in QP, why didn't they come out ahead of it? They could have had a statement out yesterday. Today seemed very rushed. I was surprised that they weren't more on top of it.
But again, this company's been registered for Loblaws in the Ontario Lobby Registry for 6 months, and we're just hearing about it now.
You're making my case.
I am making. No, I'm saying the Liberals on this. We're talking politics here.
Well, you're talking about the Oppo research didn't do the job, right? This is what you're essentially saying.
And we're talking politics, not feelings. And this is. I just don't understand why this came out so late. This was a much bigger issue a couple months ago. Now it's still a big issue, but a few months ago, it would have been very helpful if the Liberals had known this.
Well, because now they're trying to get the fall economic statement passed. Fred, your favorite topic, the Fez, which has these anti-competition measures, not anti-competition measures, measures to deal with groceries and competition and all that. But Mel, what do you make of this? Like, yes, she's not registered to lobby. The company that bears her name and that she's the CEO of is. There's a connection there. Whether it all seems to be totally above board and ethical, but it's also political.
Totally. So I was in meetings all day yesterday, so I did not hear about this yesterday, and I didn't see it in the news. And again, I was at that dinner last night, and right away it was in Jagmeet's speech about how can you trust Poilievre, how can you trust the Conservatives on food pricing, on price gouging when the person leading the team is registered to lobby for Loblaws. So that was, he said it right away. It was in his speech right away. And I'm sure that is something that the NDP will be able to say as people who have kept bringing up how we need stronger competition, how we need better protections for people so that these companies are not making massive profits when people are having a hard time paying for their groceries. So that's the way that I saw it. And I think that that'll be an attack coming from Jagmeet absolutely in the next few weeks, months.
Fred, it's an association play, right? It's the name Jenny Byrne and Associates, like the Trudeau Foundation, which the Conservatives had no qualms, no matter what the paperwork and no matter what the facts of the matter said about things, right? I mean, but that's a totally different level of awareness and foreign interference and all of these things. Is there a vulnerability here? Do you think the Liberals are onto something?
There's no question she has influence, but at the end of the day, she's not on the ballot.
Nope.
Trudeau Foundation, it's Trudeau's name.
Yeah.
So the comparison, I think, is
the Pierre Trudeau Foundation, though, is it not?
Yes, the Pierre. Yes, but
we don't put dead people on ballots anymore in Canada.
He's a member.
But it was Justin Trudeau who brought it up today, right? Like he as you said, and it was then followed by social media attack after social media attack from cabinets. So why do you think this can be effective for the Liberals? Why do you think this can get traction?
Personally, I'm not so sure. It's fun. It's a fun story.
Okay, I gotcha.
It got them. But there are some questions. To your point, you can do opposition research and you can, lead the horse to water. But if no one drinks, that I think is what the Liberals were trying to figure out is, this seems like news to us. And newsrooms have had this for longer than this week. They've had it for a couple of weeks. No one did anything with it. So does the Prime Minister have to mention it in a scrum to break news? Apparently so.
I think that's one of the things the Liberals may be learning here is, yes, they have to.
Yeah, it's a new way to communicate.
You're absolutely dominating the news cycle. Every single day, he is out there dominating it. Sometimes I get these clips or people talking, the Prime Minister looked really good today. I get that every couple of weeks because he goes out every couple of weeks.
Thanks for taking my emails.
Poilievre's out every day, right? And that's why he's kicking butt the way he is.
Just different. I think while this might be fun for Liberals, this is something that will actually work in those orange-blue ridings. When you say, "Why is he not telling the truth, and why am I actually in it for you?" That's going to work in those ridings.
That is a good point, because there is that regional battle, and we tend to focus on Poilievre versus Trudeau, but there is also Southwestern Ontario, Northern and BC. Okay, we got about 4 minutes left. Fred, what's your pick this week?
Well, it's something that's percolating, and there's a motion going to be voted next week, I believe, an NDP motion on electoral reform that I think is going to be fascinating. It's going to be, the motion is to create a citizen assembly. So we've all, I remember for decades now, we've been talking about electoral reform. We've had different ministries responsible for trying to do something. Paul Martin promised some stuff, Harper promised some stuff, Trudeau promised some stuff. No one's really done anything. The NDP actually came up with, I think, a fairly clever idea here to put forth a citizens assembly, because as Prime Minister Trudeau said, the last time he tried to do it, realized that no one party should do it. It needs to be some kind of consensus.
Right.
So this was an interesting idea. It's got all party support at some level. I don't know how much the Conservatives or Liberals support it, but there's some Liberals and Conservatives tied to it anyway. And if it passes next week, it'll call on the government. They're not bound
Not
by
obliged,
it,
yeah.
but they could create a citizens' assembly to look at electoral reform, to tinker with our system. We have this weird UK system, blend it with an American system. We don't really have a Canadian system. I think there's a lot of improvements we can make, so I think it could be an interesting thing that we go forward with.
Mel, electoral reform, red meat for the NDP base, right? This is,
After the other things we talked about tonight, I'm cool with this conversation.
There we go.
now you're happy to have a process conversation. But there was some reporting, I forget who had it, I don't mean to deny them credit, I'm thinking the Toronto Star, that there have been quiet conversations between the Liberals and the NDP about revisiting electoral reform on sort of like ease of access for 3 days of voting, for example, instead of 1 day of voting. Where do you think something like this could potentially go?
Right. So I won't lie. I laughed a little bit at the quiet conversations because it is actually in the supply and confidence agreement. So
Right. We don't get the updates on this like we do pharmacare, though, right?
So that is something that was put on the table at the beginning, especially coming out of the pandemic. Everybody, I think, realized that there was problems with the ability for people to vote. We saw, really horrible stories in Indigenous communities where there was no polling station in the riding. So these are different ways where we can, instead of seeing those low turnout numbers, increase those numbers. So that was something that they had talked about back in the day. So I'm glad to hear that is conversations that they're having. Yes, red meat for the base. I think, regular folks don't totally understand it. So how salient is it outside of that base is hard to tell. But while it would be great for this to go forward, I think, as a democracy or as how our elections work, I would imagine that the Liberals aren't going to be in favor of this next week. We'll see. But if they aren't in favor of this politically, it's another sign that, Team Orange can go back to that base and say, they aren't going to do this thing.
So, Greg, we got about 40 seconds left. Like, there's the motion that Fred highlighted. There is the quiet conversation. If you're going to make changes, as these conversations could lead to, you got to bring the Conservatives in at some point, don't you? Because the Liberal NDP coalition changing election rules. You know how that.
In theory, yes, but I'm not sure the atmosphere right now lends itself to it. I would advise people follow Mel's advice. Pay attention to the supply and confidence agreement. It's there. Don't panic.
I know.
We know it's going to be talked about. Citizens Assembly is. I think that's a tougher one to kind of get going. But there's a lot of stuff that is in that agreement. Don't forget, when it comes up, it might not be news.
Well, when there's progress on it,
Sure.
it's news. And it's only just shaping the agenda till now, on election day. All right, gang, thanks. It's good to see you again. Craig McEachern, Melanie Richer, and Fred Delory.